The sea was merciless that night. Waves crashed against the side of the luxury yacht, swallowing the silence with their violent roar. The sky, once a canvas of golden sunset, had turned into a furious storm. On deck, Isabella Tran clutched her swollen belly, her face pale, her breath shallow. She was 5 months pregnant, fragile yet fighting for every second of life. She thought this night was supposed to be a romantic escape planned by her husband, Marcus. Instead, it became the stage for her betrayal. Marcus stood only a few feet away, his expression colder than the wind that cut through Isabella's skin. Beside him, a woman with ruby lips and eyes filled with triumph, Vivien, watched with a smile that could pierce through bones. Isabella's heart shattered. She had suspected the affair, but she'd never imagined the man she trusted with her life would try to end it. Her voice trembled. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "I'm carrying your child." But Marcus did not flinch. He leaned closer, his words cruel and sharp. "That child means nothing to me. You mean nothing to me. Tonight, you disappear, and everything you built becomes mine." The storm seemed to rage louder, as if nature itself recoiled at his words. Isabella's tears mixed with the rain streaming down her face. She took a step back, terrified, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Marcus's twisted smile. Then, without hesitation, he shoved her. The world spun in an instant. The sound of her scream was drowned by the ocean's roar as she plunged into the black abyss below. Freezing salt water wrapped around her body like chains, dragging her deeper and deeper. Her lungs burned as she struggled to breathe, panic flooding her every nerve. Her baby, her precious unborn baby, was all she could think of. She could not die. Not now. Above the waves, Marcus turned his back. Vivien's laughter echoed through the storm as the yacht sailed away, leaving Isabella to sink into darkness. For Marcus, it was done. His wife would be gone forever. His empire would be his. Vivien would be his queen. But the sea had its own plan. As Isabella's strength began to fade, her body drifting like a broken doll, a distant light pierced through the storm. A small fishing boat, guided by determination rather than luxury, cut across the violent waters. A man's voice shouted against the wind, urgent, desperate. "Hold on. Don't give up." Isabella's consciousness flickered. Through blurred vision, she saw him, a rugged fisherman with eyes fierce as the storm itself, diving into the water without hesitation. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her toward life when death was inches away. For the first time that night, hope touched Isabella's soul. And yet, Marcus had no idea that the woman he left to drown would rise again, stronger than ever, with justice burning in her heart. Before the storm, before the betrayal, Isabella Tran's life was the kind people envied from afar. She was the face of Tran Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire she had inherited and expanded with her sharp mind and relentless drive. Her name appeared on magazine covers, her speeches filled business halls, and her signature decisions shaped skylines across the city. At only 32, Isabella was a woman of extraordinary power. She sat in boardrooms surrounded by men twice her age, yet her voice carried more weight than any of them. Investors trusted her. Employees respected her. Rivals feared her. She was the kind of woman who could turn a failing project into a gold mine with nothing but determination and vision. Yet, behind the glass walls of her corporate empire, Isabella longed for something more intimate. Love, a family, a partner who would stand beside her when the lights dimmed and the applause faded. That was why, when Marcus Nguyen walked into her life, she allowed herself to believe in him. He was charming, confident, and ambitious, the kind of man who seemed to complete the picture of her perfect life. She fell in love with him, blind to the shadows hidden behind his smile. They married in a lavish ceremony that the media called the wedding of the decade. Isabella thought she had it all: a thriving empire, a loving husband, and soon a child growing inside her. She imagined Marcus holding their baby, imagined quiet nights filled with laughter instead of business calls. Isabella's pregnancy brought her unexpected joy. She slowed down her endless meetings to attend doctor visits, proudly showed her growing belly at press events, and dreamed about decorating the nursery. For once, she allowed herself to be soft, to believe in the security of family. But even then, cracks had begun to show. Marcus grew distant, often disappearing for business trips that stretched too long. He snapped at Isabella's questions, brushed aside her concerns, and treated her pregnancy as an inconvenience rather than a blessing. Still, Isabella's heart refused to see the truth. She told herself he was stressed, that his moods were temporary, that once the baby came, things would change. She had no idea that Marcus had already decided their future, and it did not include her. Her wealth, her power, her empire, all of it had become a prize he could not resist. And standing in the shadows was Vivien, his secret lover, whispering poison into his ear, feeding his greed with promises of a life they could share once Isabella was gone. But Isabella, radiant in her strength and innocence, carried on, unaware. She planned their yacht trip as a chance to heal the distance between them. She bought new dresses, packed her favorite books, and smiled at the thought of watching the sunset with Marcus by her side. She was convinced it would be a new beginning. What she didn't know was that Marcus had chosen it to be the end. And when that yacht set sail, Isabella was walking straight into the trap that would change her life forever. Marcus Nguyen was the kind of man who could walk into any room and command attention without saying a word. Tall, sharply dressed, and quick with his charm, he gave off the aura of a devoted husband and accomplished businessman. To outsiders, he looked like Isabella's perfect match, a man who balanced her power with his quiet strength. He was photographed holding her hand at charity galas, whispering into her ear at red carpet events, smiling proudly as cameras flashed. But behind closed doors, Marcus was not the man the world believed him to be. He had grown up in the shadow of others, always chasing wealth he could never reach on his own. Meeting Isabella had been like striking gold. She wasn't just beautiful, she was powerful, rich, untouchable. To Marcus, marrying her wasn't about love, it was about access. Access to her empire, her influence, her fortune. In the beginning, he played his role well. He showered Isabella with affection, made grand gestures, and convinced her that he was the man she could trust. And Isabella, longing for love beyond her empire, gave him her heart without question. But once the vows were spoken and the wedding rings slid onto their fingers, Marcus's mask began to slip. He started living two lives. By day, he stood beside Isabella as the picture of loyalty. By night, he indulged in the arms of Vivien Lee, a woman as cunning as she was beautiful. Vivien was the fire that stoked his darkest desires. She whispered into his ear about how unfair it was that Isabella held all the power while he lived in her shadow. She teased him with the idea of what life could be if Isabella were gone, if the empire belonged to him, if the wealth flowed freely, if they could live as king and queen without anyone in their way. Marcus listened, and slowly his ambition turned into obsession. He grew colder toward Isabella, though he masked it in public. At home, he snapped at her, belittled her, and ignored her joy over the pregnancy. To him, the baby wasn't a gift, it was an obstacle, another tie that bound him to a woman he no longer wanted. The plan began to form in his mind like a dark seed. He knew Isabella trusted him completely. He knew she longed for his affection and would follow him anywhere if it meant saving their marriage. And so he crafted the perfect lie. A romantic yacht trip, a chance to rekindle what they once had. To Isabella, it was a gesture of love. To Marcus, it was the perfect cover for murder. He rehearsed the plan over and over in his mind. Push her. Watch her fall. Sail away as if nothing happened. With Isabella gone, he could inherit everything. No one would suspect the grieving husband. He would stand at her funeral, crocodile tears streaming, while the world offered him sympathy, and he would laugh inside knowing he had won. What Marcus never expected was that fate had a way of turning hunters into prey. And the woman he planned to erase would become the very storm that destroyed him. If Marcus was the mask of charm, then Vivien Lee was the flame that burned away his restraint. She was the kind of woman who knew her beauty was a weapon and wielded it like a blade. With raven black hair cascading down her shoulders, eyes sharp as glass, and a smile that hinted at danger, Vivien didn't just walk into Marcus's life, she invaded it. Their first encounter had been at a lavish charity gala Isabella hosted. Vivien was there on the arm of a wealthy investor, draped in diamonds that sparkled under the chandeliers. Marcus noticed her instantly. Unlike Isabella, who carried herself with elegance and quiet dignity, Vivien radiated temptation. She laughed too loudly, held her gaze too long, and moved with a confidence that dared men to chase her. For Marcus, it was a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. That night, when Isabella mingled with politicians and business leaders, Marcus found himself cornered by Vivien in a shadowed hallway. Her words were bold, dripping with provocation. "You don't belong in her shadow. A man like you should be the king, not the servant." From that moment, their affair spiraled like wildfire. Vivien became the secret he couldn't give up. She fed his ego, stroked his pride, and poisoned his heart against the woman who trusted him. When Marcus vented about Isabella's strength, Vivien would sneer, "She thinks she owns you. Prove her wrong. Take what's yours." Vivien's greed was bottomless. She didn't want Marcus for love. She wanted Isabella's fortune, Isabella's empire, Isabella's life dismantled piece by piece. In Vivien's mind, the only way she and Marcus could ever rule together was if Isabella was gone. And so she became the whisper in his ear. The architect of betrayal. At secret dinners and hotel suites, Vivien would draw imaginary crowns in the air and laugh softly. "Picture it," she told Marcus. "You, the head of Tran Global Holdings, me by your side, no one to question us, no one to hold us back." Marcus drank in her words like poison disguised as wine. Every time he hesitated, Vivien pressed harder, reminding him of the fortune that could be his, the power he could seize, how the life he could live if only Isabella disappeared. And when Isabella announced her pregnancy, Vivien's mask slipped entirely. Her fury boiled over. "She's chaining you to her forever," she spat. "If that child is born, you'll never be free. Don't you see? It's now or never, Marcus." That was the night the plan solidified. Marcus promised Vivien that he would end it, that Isabella would no longer stand in their way. And Vivien kissed him like a queen crowning her king, her eyes glinting with victory. But Vivien underestimated one thing: Isabella's resilience. She saw her only as an obstacle, not as a woman whose spirit could withstand betrayal and rise stronger. And when the storm came, Vivien would learn that stealing a crown from a queen always comes with a price far greater than gold. The invitation had come unexpectedly. Marcus walked into Isabella's office one late afternoon, his voice unusually soft, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling tenderness. "You've been working too hard," he told her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Let's get away, just the two of us. A yacht trip. We'll watch the sunset, escape the noise, and remember why we fell in love." For Isabella, those words were like rain on parched soil. She had been aching for Marcus to notice her, to see beyond the titles and meetings and wealth. She thought maybe, just maybe, her husband was finally reaching for her again. Her heart swelled with hope as she imagined them sailing into the horizon, leaving behind the tension that had quietly eroded their marriage. She spent the following week preparing, her joy renewed. Dresses were carefully folded into silk-lined luggage, her favorite books tucked beside baby clothes she had secretly bought. She even brought along the tiny silver rattle she'd chosen for their child, dreaming of the day Marcus would hold it with pride. On the day of departure, the yacht gleamed like a jewel against the harbor. Staff rushed to and fro, loading champagne, exotic fruits, and delicacies onto the deck. Isabella stepped aboard in a flowing white dress, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. She looked radiant, glowing not just from her pregnancy, but from the hope that love was about to be reborn. Marcus, meanwhile, played his role flawlessly. He kissed her cheek in front of the crew, whispered sweet nothings into her ear, and held her hand as though nothing in the world mattered but her. To Isabella, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. But Marcus's heart was elsewhere. In the shadows of the cabin, Vivien waited. Disguised as a guest of a business partner, she had boarded the yacht under the pretense of joining later for cocktails. Her lips curled into a smile as she watched Isabella from a distance, her eyes sharp, her voice dripping with contempt when she whispered to Marcus, "Tonight, she disappears. No more delays." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. His plan was simple, elegant, and final. The storm forecasted for the evening was a gift from fate. All he needed to do was lure Isabella onto the deck, let the waves mask her screams, and push her into the abyss. By the time the crew noticed she was gone, it would be too late. Isabella, oblivious, leaned against the railing as the yacht set sail. The wind tugged gently at her hair. The The sea shimmered in the fading light, and her heart whispered promises of reconciliation. She believed Marcus was finally hers again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus approached her, his footsteps steady, his smile practiced. Isabella turned toward him, her eyes glowing with trust. She whispered, "This feels like a new beginning." But for Marcus, it was meant to be her end. The evening unfolded like a dream Isabella had waited months to live. Dinner was served on the yacht's polished deck, candlelight flickering against the restless waves. The chef had prepared her favorite meal, grilled salmon with lemon butter, yet Isabella hardly tasted a bite. Her attention was fixed on Marcus, who for the first time in months seemed to look at her the way he once had. He held her hand across the table, lifted her glass of sparkling water for a toast, and leaned close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek. "To us," he whispered, raising his glass. Her heart leapt. Maybe, she thought, the cold distance between them had finally melted. Maybe the man she married had returned. She wanted to believe it so badly that she ignored the chill in his eyes, the stiffness in his smile. After dinner, Marcus suggested they take a walk on the upper deck. The storm clouds had gathered, but the air was strangely calm, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Isabella wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him, her steps light, her soul full of fragile hope. They stopped at the railing. The sea stretched endlessly into the night, black and bottomless. Marcus stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. For a fleeting second, she thought he was about to embrace her. Instead, he leaned down, his lips grazing her ear. "You've had a good run, Isabella," he murmured, his voice colder than the wind. Her body froze. What do you mean?" she stammered, turning slightly to meet his gaze. The mask slipped. Gone was the doting husband, the man she thought she had married. In his place stood a stranger, his eyes hard, his mouth twisted with cruelty. "You really thought I loved you?" Marcus sneered. "You were a stepping stone, that's all. Your money, your empire, your name. Without you, I was nothing. With you gone, I'll have everything." Isabella's stomach clenched, not from her pregnancy but from the sickening realization of what he meant. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Marcus, please, I'm carrying your child," she begged, her voice cracking. "You can't." He cut her off with a sharp laugh. "That child? Just another chain tying me to you. I don't want it. I don't want you. Tonight, both of you disappear." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head, backing away toward the railing. Her hands clutched her belly protectively. "You don't mean this. You can't mean this." But Marcus stepped closer, his movements deliberate, his shadow swallowing hers. Thunder cracked overhead as lightning lit his face, twisted, determined, merciless. Her voice broke into a whisper. "How could you?" He leaned in, his breath hot against her cheek, and hissed, easily. And with one brutal motion he shoved her against the railing. The scream that tore from Isabella's throat was ripped away by the storm. Her body teetered, her feet slipping on the slick deck as she clung desperately to the railing with trembling hands. Her eyes widened in horror, staring into the face of the man she once believed would protect her forever. And in that instant, Isabella realized, Marcus wasn't just betraying her love, he was stealing her life. The shove came harder than Isabella could have imagined. 1 second, she was clinging to the railing with all her strength, her knuckles white, her heart pounding. The next, Marcus's hand struck with brutal force, and her grip slipped. Her scream split the night, but the storm swallowed it whole. The world flipped upside down as Isabella's body plunged into the freezing water. The impact stole the air from her lungs, her entire body jolting from the shock. Salt water flooded her mouth, her throat burning as she kicked desperately, trying to keep herself afloat. The weight of her soaked dress dragged her downward, pulling her like an anchor toward the dark abyss below. Instinct screamed at her to fight. For herself. For her baby. She thrashed her arms, gasping, her chest searing with pain as she struggled to breathe. Each wave that crashed over her felt like a wall, pressing her deeper into despair. Above her, the yacht sailed away. Its lights shimmered faintly through the rain, growing smaller with each second, until it became nothing more than a ghostly glow swallowed by the storm. Marcus never looked back. Vivien's laughter, cruel and triumphant, lingered in Isabella's ears as though the sea itself had recorded it. Panic clawed at her chest. She was alone, pregnant, exhausted. The ocean was merciless, tossing her like a rag doll, pulling her under again and again. Every time she surfaced, she gasped violently, salt water tearing into her lungs. Her arms trembled, her legs burned, her belly ached as she whispered through chattering teeth, "Please, not my baby, please." Her vision blurred as tears mixed with rain. She thought of the nursery she never finished, the lullabies she had hummed while placing her hands on her stomach, the tiny silver rattle packed in her bag. She thought of the life inside her, innocent and undeserving of this cruelty. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, Isabella saw her reflection in the water, a fragile figure fighting against a sea too vast to conquer. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly powerless, not as a CEO, not as a woman of influence, just as a mother trying desperately to live. Her strength waned. Her body grew heavy. Darkness pressed against her mind, whispering that it would be easier to let go, to sink into the quiet embrace of the ocean. But then, a thought cut through the fog. This child needs me. With every ounce of will she had left, Isabella forced her arms to move, clawing toward the faint rhythm of waves, refusing to surrender. Yet the storm was relentless, dragging her under once more. Her lungs screamed for air as blackness closed in. The last thing she saw was a faint light flickering in the distance, like a star breaking through the storm. And just as Isabella's strength gave out, that light grew closer. A sign that fate was not ready to let her die. The storm raged with merciless fury, waves towering like walls of black water. For most sailors, it was a night to avoid the ocean, to seek refuge on land. But Ethan Pham was not most sailors. A fisherman born and raised by the sea, he knew its moods, its dangers, and its secrets. That night, while guiding his small boat through the violent waters, his sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual, a figure thrashing desperately against the tide. At first, he thought it was debris tossed overboard. But then lightning split the sky, and he saw her, Isabella, her pale face half submerged, her arms flailing weakly, her body moments from sinking. Ethan's heart pounded. "Hold on!" he shouted into the storm, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Without hesitation, he cut the engine, stripped off his jacket, and dove into the freezing water. The ocean swallowed him instantly, pulling at his limbs with the strength of 1,000 hands. But he kicked harder, his focus locked on the fragile woman drifting further into the abyss. The salt burned his eyes, the cold bit into his skin, but nothing mattered except reaching her. With each stroke, the distance between them closed. He could see her face now, eyes half closed, lips trembling, her body limp as though surrendering to the waves. "No, not yet!" Ethan roared against the storm. Finally, he reached her. Wrapping his arm firmly around her chest, he pulled her head above the water. Her breath came in broken gasps, each one weaker than the last. He could feel the weight of her soaked dress dragging them both down, but he refused to let go. "Stay with me," he shouted, tightening his grip. "Don't give up. You're not alone." With powerful strokes, Ethan fought his way back toward the boat. Each wave threatened to tear her from his arms, each current tried to pull them under. But Ethan's resolve was unshakable. He had seen too many lives lost to the sea. He would not let this woman and her unborn child be another. At last, his hand grasped the side of his boat. Summoning every ounce of strength, he hauled Isabella aboard, collapsing beside her as rain hammered the deck. She lay motionless, her skin icy, her lips blue. Panic surged through him. "No, no, no, not like this," Ethan muttered, pressing his hands to her chest. He performed chest compressions, desperate to coax life back into her fragile body. "Breathe. Please breathe." Seconds stretched into eternity. Then a cough, a violent, wet gasp as seawater poured from her mouth. Isabella's chest heaved as air returned to her lungs. Tears blurred Ethan's vision as relief washed over him. That's it, keep breathing," he whispered, brushing the wet hair from her face. She blinked, dazed, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "My baby?" Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, both of you. I promise." And though the storm still raged around them, a fragile spark of hope flickered in the darkness. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would bind their fates forever. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the sea eerily calm, as if mocking the chaos it had unleashed only hours before. Ethan's small fishing boat drifted toward the shore, its deck still slick with rain and salt water. Inside the tiny cabin, Isabella lay wrapped in a blanket, her body trembling from the cold, her breath shallow but steady. Ethan sat nearby, watching over her like a guardian. His rugged hands, calloused from years of hauling nets, had gently pulled the soaked dress from her shoulders and replaced it with dry clothes from his storage chest. He had lit a small lantern, its golden glow flickering across her pale face. When her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouded her gaze. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, one hand instinctively covering her belly. Panic surged through her as memories flooded back. The yacht, Marcus's cruel smile, Vivien's mocking laugh, the shove, the fall. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "My baby, is my baby still?" Ethan leaned forward quickly, his tone steady, reassuring. "I checked. Your heartbeat is strong and so is the baby's. You're both alive." Tears spilled from Isabella's eyes, a mix of relief and anguish. She pressed her palm firmly to her belly, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." Her shoulders shook as sobs broke free, the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. Ethan said nothing at first. He understood the language of silence, the kind of grief that words could not soothe. He simply sat beside her, letting her cry, his presence solid and unyielding. Minutes passed before she finally looked at him, her eyes searching his. Why did you save me?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you needed saving. That's reason enough." Those words, simple and raw, struck her harder than any flowery promise Marcus had ever made. She studied him, the rough stubble along his jaw, the steady strength in his eyes, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. He was nothing like the polished men in her world, yet in that moment he felt more real, more human than anyone she had ever known. Still, despair lingered like a shadow. "He wanted me dead," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The man I trusted with everything. He pushed me into the sea like I was nothing, and I loved him. God, I loved him." Ethan clenched his fists, anger flashing across his face. "Then he doesn't deserve to walk free. A man who betrays his wife, his unborn child, he's no man at all." Isabella lowered her gaze, tears dripping onto the blanket. She felt broken, stripped of the illusions that had once given her comfort. Yet beneath the pain, a seed of determination stirred. She had survived. Her child had survived. And somewhere deep inside, she knew survival was only the beginning. Ethan placed a hand gently over hers. "Rest now. You're safe here. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." But Isabella knew tomorrow wouldn't just be about survival. It would be about justice. Back in the city, news spread like wildfire. The beloved CEO of Tran Global Holdings, Isabella Tran, had gone missing at sea. The official report was vague, a tragic accident during a yacht trip. The Coast Guard claimed the storm made rescue impossible. Her body had not been recovered, but the chances of survival were slim. To the world, Isabella was gone. Marcus played the grieving husband flawlessly. Cameras flashed as he stood before reporters, dressed in a black suit, his head bowed, his voice breaking with rehearsed sorrow. "My wife, she was the light of my life," he said, dabbing at his dry eyes with a handkerchief. "This tragedy is more than I can bear." The public ate it up. Headlines read, "CEO Isabella Tran lost at sea. Husband mourns nation's business icon." Behind closed doors, Marcus reveled in his victory. Vivien sat curled against him in the penthouse suite, sipping champagne as they watched the coverage on television. She smirked, her red lips curling with satisfaction. "You're brilliant," she purred, resting her head on his shoulder. "No one suspects a thing. Soon, the empire will be yours." Marcus's grin was sharp, almost feral. "Ours," he corrected, raising his glass. "Isabella built the fortune, but we'll enjoy it." Step by step, Marcus moved to secure his claim. He summoned Isabella's legal team, feigning devastation as he discussed her last wishes. He insisted she had always wanted him to take control if anything happened to her. The lawyers, sympathetic to the broken man before them, began drafting documents to transfer authority. At Tran Global's headquarters, employees whispered in grief. Isabella had been more than a boss. She had been a leader, a mentor, a visionary. Her portrait, draped in black ribbon, stood in the lobby. Marcus walked through the halls with heavy footsteps, his face the picture of mourning. But in the boardroom, his mask slipped. "We move forward immediately," he declared to the directors, his tone sharp. "Isabella would have wanted stability. From this moment, I will assume control." Some executives shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances, sensing something amiss. But Marcus silenced them with a practiced speech about honoring Isabella's legacy. He played the role of the dutiful widower determined to keep her dreams alive, and for the most part, people believed him. At night, however, the facade crumbled into greed. Marcus and Vivien toasted to their new life, laughing at the world that pitied them. Vivien tried on diamond necklaces Isabella once wore, twirling in front of the mirror. Marcus opened drawers filled with documents, reviewing the assets he now controlled. "We did it," Vivien whispered, pressing her lips to his. "She's gone, forever." Marcus smirked, sliding his arms around her. "And soon, no one will even remember her name." But across the sea, in a humble fisherman's cottage, Isabella stirred in her sleep, her heart beating strong, her child still safe within her. She was alive. And when the truth came out, Marcus would learn that the dead don't stay silent forever. The fisherman's cottage was a world apart from the glittering skyscrapers and glass boardrooms Isabella once commanded. It sat on the edge of a quiet coastal village, its wooden walls weathered by years of sea winds, its windows overlooking endless waves. For days, Isabella remained in the small bed Ethan had prepared for her, wrapped in thick quilts, her body fragile but slowly recovering. At first, her sleep was restless. She would wake in the night, drenched in sweat, Marcus's voice echoing in her mind, "Tonight, you disappear." She would jolt upright, clutching her belly, her breath shallow, fear clawing at her chest. Ethan would be there, every time, steady as stone. He would bring her water, sit at her side, and speak softly until the terror faded. "You're safe here," he told her one night, his voice calm against the storm inside her. "No one will hurt you again." But safety didn't erase the pain. Isabella carried two truths inside her. She was alive, and the man she loved had wanted her dead. That betrayal cut deeper than the waves ever could. Tears came without warning, sometimes in the morning sun, sometimes in the quiet of night. She grieved not only for her marriage, but for the trust, the illusions, and the love she had buried at sea. Still, there was life growing within her, reminding her that surrender was not an option. Each time she felt the faint flutter of her baby's kicks, strength surged through her veins. She would place her hand on her stomach and whisper, "I'm still here. We're still here." Ethan noticed that strength. He saw it in the way she sat longer each day, her back straighter, her eyes clearer. He brought her fresh meals, warm soups, grilled fish, fruits from the market, and urged her to walk along the shore to regain her energy. At first, she resisted, afraid of the sea that had nearly claimed her. But one evening, he coaxed her outside. The sand was cool beneath her bare feet, the waves lapping gently as if apologizing for their rage. Isabella stood at the water's edge, trembling, but Ethan's hand was firm in hers. "The ocean took much from you," he said quietly, "but it also gave you another chance. Don't let fear steal that from you." His words sank deep. She realized he was right. The sea hadn't only been her enemy, it had also delivered her into the arms of the man who had saved her. As days turned into weeks, Isabella found herself confiding in Ethan. She told him about Marcus, about Vivien, about the empire she had built with her own hands. Ethan listened without judgment, his silence carrying more comfort than 1,000 empty reassurances. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Isabella looked at Ethan and whispered, "You saved my life. But more than that, you reminded me it's worth fighting for." And in that moment, Isabella began to see herself not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman reborn from the storm. In the weeks following Isabella's death, Marcus Nguyen wasted no time weaving himself deeper into her empire. Tran Global Holdings, once guided by Isabella's sharp vision and steady hand, now bent under the weight of Marcus's ambition. He began by reshuffling the board of directors, replacing those loyal to Isabella with men eager to please him. He signed off on risky deals she would have never approved, hungry for quick profits that fed his ego more than the company's future. Under his reign, extravagance replaced discipline. Lavish parties were thrown in her memory, but the guest lists included investors and socialites who cared little for mourning and more for Marcus's growing influence. In public, Marcus wore the mask of grief. He spoke at charity events about Isabella's legacy, his voice cracking on cue, his hand clutching his chest as if his heart still bled for her. Reporters captured him placing white roses by her portrait in the headquarters lobby, his jaw tight with rehearsed sorrow. But behind closed doors, Marcus celebrated. Vivien now lived openly in the penthouse Isabella once called home. She lounged on Isabella's silk sofas, wore Isabella's diamonds, and strutted through the halls as though she already owned the empire. "You see?" Vivien whispered one night, tracing her fingers along Marcus's chest as they overlooked the glittering city skyline. "The world believes every word you say. Isabella is gone, and you are king." Marcus smirked, sipping his glass of whiskey. "No, Vivien, we are king and queen." Yet cracks had begun to form. At Tran Global, a few executives murmured uneasily. They had known Isabella too well, admired her too deeply, to fully believe the story. "She was cautious," one whispered in the break room. "She never would have risked sailing into a storm." Another frowned. "Her body's never been found? Doesn't that bother you?" The questions were quiet, drowned out by Marcus's authority, but they lingered like smoke after a fire. Even outside the company, whispers stirred. Some journalists, unsatisfied with the official report, began digging into the night of the accident. One, a young investigative reporter named Daniel Cho, noticed discrepancies. Crew members dismissed unusually quickly, logs missing from the yacht, Marcus's alibi too perfectly rehearsed. Daniel's instincts screamed that something was wrong. When he requested an interview with Marcus, the widower's charm cracked for the first time. Marcus's eyes darkened as he snapped, "My wife is dead, and you dare imply otherwise? Leave it alone, or you'll regret it." But arrogance made Marcus careless. His need for control, his hunger for admiration, it blinded him to the storm gathering beneath the surface. One evening, as he toasted investors in the very boardroom Isabella once commanded, he leaned back in her chair, Vivien at his side, and declared, "The future is ours." Isabella's chapter is closed. But fate was already writing a new chapter, one Marcus could never control, because the woman he buried in the sea was alive, and her return would shatter his stolen crown. The days in the coastal village stretched into weeks, each one a fragile step between despair and strength. Isabella had survived the storm, but survival was not enough. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face, his smirk as he pushed her, his voice dripping with venom. "Tonight, you disappear." She could have vanished quietly, built a new life in hiding, far from the corruption of wealth and betrayal. But Isabella was not made for silence. She had built an empire from the ground up. She had carried thousands of employees on her shoulders, fought battles in boardrooms, and won. She would not allow a man like Marcus to steal everything. Not her company, not her child, not her dignity. One morning she stood at the shoreline, the wind whipping her hair, her hand resting firmly on her belly. Ethan watched from a distance, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. He had seen the fire in her grow stronger each day, and now it blazed in her eyes. She turned to him, her voice low but firm. "I can't stay hidden anymore. He thinks I'm dead. He's taking everything I built. He's poisoning my name." Her voice cracked, but she held herself tall. "I have to go back." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're not ready to face him, not yet. You're still healing." Her lips trembled, but determination stiffened her spine. "I'm healing because of you, because you reminded me I still have something to fight for. This baby," she placed her hand protectively over her belly, "deserves to know their mother didn't give up." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to protect her from the pain, from the danger, from the storm she was walking into. But he also knew he couldn't chain her to safety when her soul demanded justice. "I'll stand with you," he said finally, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes, you're not facing him alone." For the first time in weeks, Isabella allowed herself a faint smile. Gratitude shimmered in her tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Ethan replied, his tone quiet but unwavering. "Just live. That's enough." That night, Isabella sat at the small wooden table in Ethan's cottage, a single candle burning between them. She took a notebook and began writing. Names of board members she could trust, allies who might still believe in her, evidence she remembered from that night. Her hands shook, but her resolve did not. Every stroke of the pen was a vow. She would expose Marcus. She would reveal Vivien's role. She would reclaim her throne. And as the candle flickered, Isabella whispered to herself, "I may have been broken, but I am not finished." Ethan, watching from across the table, saw not just a survivor, but a queen rising from the ashes of betrayal. And when she returned to the world Marcus thought he controlled, she would no longer be the woman he tried to drown. She would be the storm. Marcus Nian had always prided himself on control. He believed he had orchestrated Isabella's disappearance flawlessly. No witnesses, no evidence, no body. To the world she was gone, and he was the grieving widower poised to inherit everything. But perfection has a way of unraveling, and Marcus was about to discover that even the most careful plans leave shadows. It began with whispers. A maid at the penthouse mentioned hearing Marcus argue with Isabella before the yacht trip. A deckhand, dismissed suddenly after the voyage, hinted that something about that night felt wrong. Nothing concrete, just murmurs. But murmurs spread, and soon Marcus felt eyes on him wherever he went. At Tran Global Holdings, directors once eager to embrace him now exchanged uneasy glances. "She was too cautious to take that yacht into a storm," one muttered during a board meeting. Another frowned at Marcus's aggressive spending, whispering, "Is this what Isabella would have wanted?" Marcus silenced them with his usual charm, but the doubts lodged like splinters. And then came the journalist. Daniel Cho, a young reporter with a reputation for persistence, had been digging into the so-called accident. One afternoon, he cornered Marcus outside the company's headquarters. Cameras clicked as Daniel raised his voice. "Mr. Nguyen, can you explain why the yacht's logs for that night are missing, or why several crew members have refused to speak?" Marcus's jaw tightened, the mask of sorrow slipping for the briefest moment. He forced a smile, his tone calm but edged. "My wife is dead, Mr. Cho. Show some respect." He walked away, but inside, his chest burned with unease. That night, in the penthouse, Marcus poured himself a glass of scotch, pacing furiously. Vivien lounged on the sofa, rolling her eyes. "You're overthinking," she said, her voice smooth. "She's gone. The sea doesn't give back what it takes." But Marcus wasn't so sure. He had seen Isabella fight before. In the boardroom, in negotiations, in life itself. She wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered easily. And though he had pushed her into the waves, the thought haunted him. What if she survived? Every creak of the floorboards, every knock at the door, every shadow in the corner seemed to mock him. He woke at night, drenched in sweat, imagining her standing at the foot of his bed, dripping with seawater, her eyes burning with vengeance. Vivien tried to soothe him, but her words only fed his paranoia. "Even if she did survive," she said one evening, twirling a diamond necklace around her fingers, "what could she do? She has nothing, no allies, no power." Marcus stared out the window at the glittering city below, his reflection fractured in the glass. He whispered to himself, "Unless she comes back for everything." The thought made his blood run cold. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, far from the penthouse's luxury, Isabella was already preparing her return, each day bringing her closer to the reckoning he feared most. Vivien Leigh had always believed she was untouchable. She was beautiful, cunning, and ruthless, the kind of woman who could bend men to her will with nothing more than a glance. When Marcus promised her the world, she believed him. Together, they would wear Isabella's crown, sit on Isabella's throne, and live the life of kings and queens. At first, everything had gone according to plan. Isabella was declared dead, the empire fell into Marcus's hands, and Vivien slipped into the role of his hidden queen. She wore Isabella's jewels, drank champagne in Isabella's penthouse, and walked through Isabella's offices as if she already owned them. For a while it felt intoxicating. But power built on lies is fragile, and Vivien was beginning to feel the cracks. It started with the whispers, directors doubting Marcus's decisions, employees murmuring that Isabella's death didn't add up. Then came the journalists, like vultures circling, hungry for the truth. Vivien noticed how Marcus grew restless, snapping at the smallest things, pacing at night like a man haunted. One evening, she watched him from the doorway as he stared at his reflection in the mirror, muttering under his breath. His glass of scotch trembled in his hand. "She's gone," Vivien reminded him, stepping closer. "You killed her. She's not coming back." But Marcus didn't answer. His silence chilled her more than words could. For the first time, Vivien felt fear. She had thrown her lot entirely with Marcus, burned every bridge behind her. If he fell, she would fall too. And unlike Marcus, she didn't have an empire to cushion her landing. She had nothing, no company, no fortune of her own. only borrowed diamonds and stolen promises. Her dreams of ruling beside Marcus began to twist into nightmares. What if the truth came out? What if Isabella had survived? What if the police started asking questions they couldn't answer? That night, as Marcus pored over documents in the study, Vivien confronted him. "You're slipping," she hissed. "The board is watching you. The press is watching you. If you don't get yourself together, they'll smell blood." Marcus slammed his fist against the desk, his eyes blazing. "I handled it. She's gone. The sea took her. No one survives that storm." Vivien flinched at his fury, but she wasn't convinced. Her instincts, sharp and self-serving, whispered that Marcus was no longer the strong partner she once admired. He was unraveling, and if he collapsed, she would be buried with him. So Vivien began to think of herself. She secretly contacted an attorney, asking discreet questions about her rights, about what protection she might have if Marcus faced accusations. She started hiding money, transferring small sums into accounts Marcus didn't know about. She told herself it was just insurance, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was preparing to abandon him the moment the empire crumbled. Because for all her love of power, Vivien loved only herself. And when the storm of truth finally broke, Vivien would discover that standing on a throne of betrayal means there's no one to catch you when you fall. Weeks of silence had hardened into resolve. Isabella was no longer the broken woman dragged from the sea, trembling in a stranger's arms. She had healed, slowly but surely, her strength returning with every breath, every step, every beat of her child's growing heart. Ethan watched the transformation with awe. The fragile survivor he had pulled from the waves was gone. In her place stood the Isabella Tran the world had once known, a leader, a warrior, a queen. But this time, her power was sharper, forged by betrayal and loss. One evening, she stood before the cracked mirror in Ethan's cottage, her hands smoothing the simple dress she wore. Her face was pale but fierce, her eyes blazing with a fire Marcus could never extinguish. "I'm ready," she said quietly, more to herself than to Ethan. "Ready for what?" he asked, though he already knew. "To show the world I'm alive," Isabella replied, her voice steady. "Marcus thinks he buried me, but I will bury his lies." Ethan's brow furrowed. "It's dangerous. He'll try to silence you." She turned, meeting his gaze with unshakable determination. "Let him try. I survived the sea. I survived him. I'll survive whatever comes next." The plan was simple but bold. Isabella reached out to Daniel Cho, the young journalist who had been digging into her disappearance. Using an encrypted phone Ethan had helped her acquire, she sent him a message. "Meet me, alone. The truth is bigger than you imagine." When Daniel arrived at the quiet coastal cafe the next day, his jaw nearly dropped. "My God," he whispered, staring at her in disbelief. "You're alive." "I am," Isabella said firmly, "and I'm ready to take everything back." She told him everything. The yacht, Marcus's betrayal, Vivien's involvement, the storm. Daniel listened intently, recording her words, his hands trembling with the weight of the story. "When the world hears this," he said, "Marcus won't stand a chance." But Isabella wasn't content with whispers in the press. She wanted to confront Marcus publicly, strip him of his mask in the very arena where he had thrived. So she chose the boardroom. A week later, Tran Global Holdings announced a memorial meeting in Isabella's honor, arranged by Marcus himself. Investors, directors, and media gathered in the gleaming glass tower, ready to mourn the woman they thought they had lost. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his grief carefully painted on his face, Vivien at his side in black silk. And then the doors opened. Gasps echoed through the room as Isabella stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She wore no jewels, no extravagant gown, just a simple black dress, her posture regal, her gaze unyielding. Marcus froze, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. Vivien's lips parted, her face draining of color. "Hello, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice calm but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Did you miss me?" And in that instant, the empire Marcus thought he controlled began to crumble, because the queen he tried to kill had returned to claim her throne. The silence that followed Isabella's entrance was deafening. Men and women who had built their careers under her leadership sat frozen in disbelief, eyes wide, breaths caught in their throats. For weeks they had mourned her, whispered prayers for her soul, and resigned themselves to Marcus's rule. Now she stood before them, very much alive, radiating strength. Marcus was the first to break, his face contorted, shifting between shock, fear, and fury. He tried to recover, forcing a smile that fell flat. "Isabella, my God, you're alive." He stepped toward her, his voice dripping with false relief. "We thought we lost you." Everyone grieved. "Save it," Isabella cut him off, her voice sharp and steady. "You didn't lose me, Marcus. You tried to kill me." A collective gasp rippled through the room. All eyes swung back to Marcus, his mask cracked, his smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I would never." Isabella stepped forward, her gaze locked on him. "On that yacht during the storm you pushed me into the sea. You left me to drown, Marcus, and you did it for greed. For her." She turned her head, her eyes piercing Vivien like arrows. Vivien's face drained of color, her grip tightening on the table's edge. Whispers spread like wildfire through the boardroom. Cameras flashed as journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every word. Marcus laughed nervously, raising his hands as though calming children. "She's confused, traumatized. The storm, it must have affected her memory." Isabella slammed her hand on the table, her voice ringing like thunder. "My memory is crystal clear. You betrayed me. You betrayed your own child." Her hand instinctively touched her belly, a silent reminder to everyone present of the unborn life Marcus had tried to erase. The directors shifted uncomfortably, doubt flickering in their eyes. They had seen Marcus's arrogance, his reckless decisions. Now, hearing Isabella's words, puzzle pieces began to align. Daniel Cho, the young journalist Isabella had confided in, stood at the back of the room. He raised his camera, snapping photo after photo, capturing the moment history shifted. Vivien tried to salvage control. She stepped forward, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Isabella, darling, you've been through so much. You don't know what you're saying." "Don't you dare," Isabella snapped, her eyes blazing. "You were there, Vivien. You laughed as Marcus pushed me overboard. You thought the storm would silence me forever. But here I am." Vivien froze, words dying on her lips. Her silence was louder than any denial. The board erupted in murmurs. Some rose to their feet, others turned accusing eyes toward Marcus. His face twisted in rage, the walls of his carefully built deception collapsing around him. "You wanted my empire," Isabella continued, her voice steady, commanding. "You thought killing me would make you king, but TranGlobal was built on integrity, not betrayal, and today the truth takes its throne back." As Marcus's mask crumbled, Isabella stood tall, no longer the victim of his betrayal, but the queen reclaiming her crown before the world's eyes. The boardroom descended into chaos. Directors murmured frantically, investors demanded answers, and cameras flashed as Isabella's accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus's carefully constructed facade cracked wide open, his mask of grief disintegrating before dozens of witnesses. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming. "Lies! All lies. She's twisting the truth because she knows she's lost control of this company." But no one looked convinced. The board members who once nodded obediently at his commands now shifted away, their eyes darting between Isabella's calm presence and Marcus's unraveling rage. The contrast was damning. Isabella stood tall, dignified, her voice unwavering. Marcus looked desperate, cornered, dangerous. Vivien, sensing the walls closing in, tried to intervene. She rose from her chair, her tone syrupy but trembling. "This is madness. Isabella must be delusional from trauma. We all mourned her. Marcus mourned her. He would never harm her." Isabella's eyes locked on Vivien's, sharp as glass. "Then explain this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a waterproof folder Ethan had helped her prepare. Inside were photos, documents, and recordings, evidence Daniel Cho had uncovered during his investigation. She spread them across the table like a dealer laying down cards. The room fell silent as the evidence spoke louder than words. Bank transfers from Marcus to offshore accounts. Testimonies from dismissed crew members who admitted they'd been paid for their silence. Security footage of Marcus and Vivien entering the yacht together hours before departure, Vivien disguised but unmistakable. Gasps echoed around the room. One director muttered, "My God," another whispered, "She's telling the truth." Vivien's face went white. She lunged forward, snatching at the papers. "These are fabricated," she shouted, her voice shrill, desperate. "You can't trust this." "Sit down," one of the senior board members snapped, his voice thunderous. "Enough lies." Marcus's composure shattered completely. He pointed at Isabella, his finger trembling with fury. "You should have stayed dead. Do you hear me? You should have stayed in the ocean where you belong." The room erupted in outrage. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras caught every word, every crack in his mask. The world would see this not as grief, but as confession. Isabella didn't flinch. She met his rage with icy calm. "You failed to kill me, Marcus. And now you've killed your own future." Vivien, realizing Marcus was beyond saving, tried to pull away from him. "I won't go down for this," she hissed, stepping back. But Marcus grabbed her wrist, yanking her close. "You're in this with me?" he growled. "Don't you dare run now." The board members recoiled. Security guards began moving toward the pair. Vivien struggled, tears smearing her mascara. "Let me go, Marcus. I never wanted this." But her words were too late. The evidence was undeniable. The empire had chosen its queen, and it was not Vivien. As Marcus's empire collapsed around him, Isabella stood unshaken. Proof that truth, once revealed, can destroy even the most carefully built lies. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within hours of Isabella's revelation, news outlets exploded with headlines. "Isabella Tran alive, accuses husband of attempted murder." "Tran global scandal, CEO returns from the dead." "Marcus Nguyen exposed." The board of directors, unwilling to let the company sink under Marcus's corruption, voted unanimously to suspend him from all authority. Security escorted him and Vivien out of the glass tower that once symbolized Isabella's empire. Cameras followed their every step, capturing Marcus's red face twisted in fury and Vivien's tear-streaked cheeks as she tried to shield herself from the flashing lights. But their humiliation was only the beginning. 2 days later, the courthouse was packed. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward as Marcus and Vivien were brought in under heavy guard. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Isabella entered with quiet dignity, her hand resting protectively on her belly, Ethan at her side like a silent guardian. The crowd rose, murmurs of awe rippling through the chamber. The prosecution laid out the evidence. Financial records, testimonies from crew members, the damning recordings Daniel Cho had uncovered. Witness after witness painted the same picture. A greedy husband, a manipulative mistress, and a plan to erase the woman who had given Marcus everything. Marcus sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between jurors as though he could still intimidate them into believing his lies. Vivien, by contrast, crumbled quickly. Under the weight of questioning, her bravado dissolved into sobs. "It was his idea," she cried, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "He planned everything. I just went along because I loved him." Her betrayal ignited Marcus's fury. He slammed his fists against the table, shouting, "You loved the money, Vivien. You pushed me to do it." The judge's gavel thundered for order as guards restrained him. The spectacle made the decision easy. The jury found Marcus guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Vivien, though spared the harshest sentence for her cooperation, was convicted of conspiracy and perjury. Both were sentenced to prison, Marcus for decades, Vivien for years that would strip her of the glamorous life she had craved. The verdict sent shockwaves through the city. Justice, long buried under wealth and deception, had prevailed. When the judge announced the sentence, Isabella closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. The chains Marcus had bound her with were finally broken. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around her, shouting questions. Isabella stood tall, her voice steady. "I was betrayed. I was left for dead. But I survived, for my child, for myself, and for the truth. Let this be a message. No woman should ever be silenced by greed or fear." Flashes erupted as cameras captured her every word. The world no longer saw her as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. And while Marcus and Vivien disappeared behind prison walls, Isabella stepped into the light. Her name, her empire, and her dignity restored. The storm that had once threatened to end Isabella's life was now a distant memory, replaced by mornings filled with sunlight and evenings graced by laughter. The world knew her story, the betrayal, the survival, the justice, and they celebrated her as more than a CEO. She had become a symbol of resilience, of the strength it takes to rise from ashes and claim life anew. But for Isabella, the true victory was not in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments she shared with Ethan. After the trial, she invited him into her world, not as a savior, but as a partner. He had stood beside her when she was broken, and now he stood beside her as she rebuilt. At first, the contrast between their lives seemed impossible. She, the head of a vast empire; he, a fisherman with nothing but his boat and his courage. But love has a way of bridging worlds. Ethan never wanted her fortune, only her happiness. And that was something Isabella had never truly known before. The day her child was born, Isabella held him close, tears streaming down her face. Ethan stood beside her, his rough hands trembling as he cradled the tiny newborn. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And he's ours." Isabella looked at him, her heart swelling. "He's yours as much as mine. You saved us both." From that moment, Ethan treated the boy as his own. He was there for every sleepless night, every first smile, every cry. He never let Isabella feel alone, never let the child feel unloved. And as the years passed, their bond grew unbreakable. To the child, Ethan was not a stepfather. He was simply father. Their happiness blossomed. Isabella and Ethan married in a quiet ceremony by the sea, with only close friends and loyal colleagues in attendance. There were no flashing cameras, no lavish displays, just vows spoken with sincerity and sealed with a kiss that carried the weight of survival and the promise of forever. At the reception, one of Isabella's closest board members raised a toast. To Isabella, who proved that storms cannot sink a true queen. And to Ethan, who reminds us all what it means to be a man. The room erupted in applause, but Isabella only smiled at Ethan, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. Months later, Isabella discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was not met with betrayal or fear, but with Ethan's arms around her, his voice whispering, "Another blessing. Another chance to love." Together they raised their children in a home filled with warmth rather than lies, laughter instead of greed. Ethan eventually joined Tran Global as co-CEO, not for power, but because Isabella trusted no one more. Under their joint leadership, the company flourished, not through manipulation, but through integrity and vision. Employees felt the change, the world admired it, and though scars from the past would never fully fade, Isabella no longer carried them alone. She had built a life where her heart was safe, her children were cherished, and her legacy was secure. On a quiet evening by the shore, Ethan wrapped his arms around her as their son played in the sand, and Isabella's growing belly promised another child soon to come. The sunset bathed them in golden light, the waves gentle against the shore. "You know," Ethan murmured, resting his chin on her shoulder, "when I found you that night, I thought I was saving your life, but truth is, you saved mine." Isabella turned, her eyes shining. "We saved each other." And as the tide whispered against the sand, Isabella knew the storm had given her more than pain. It had given her the strength to rise, the courage to love, and the family she had always dreamed of. The woman Marcus tried to destroy had become stronger than ever. Not just a survivor, not just a queen, but a mother, a wife, and the keeper of a happiness that no storm could ever take away. So that's how the story comes to an end. My dear friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey touched your heart. And maybe, like Isabella, you faced storms you thought would drown you. The Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. The very pain that almost destroyed us can be the strength that builds us. Isabella's fall into the sea was also her rise into a new life. Maybe your storm is different, but it can also be your turning point. Remember, resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about transforming it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need hope today. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because together, we're not just telling stories, we're healing hearts.